Welcome to our webinar today on Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grants for fiscal year 2020. I'm Carolyn Koska, the Financial and Grants Administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC. I have everyone muted right now, and you'll remain muted during most of the presentation. If you have any questions, just type them into that chat window at the side of your screen. I'll be watching for any questions to come across. We'll stop a couple times to answer those, and then I will unmute everyone at the end of the presentation if you want to continue more discussion or have more questions. We're going to start out today talking a little bit about SMOC. We'll look at the guidelines for the Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grant Program. We'll go on to our website and show you what resources are available to you there, show you how to get into our online grant system, and then we'll also look at the application and talk through that. And then finally, we will go through the whole grant process, what happens basically after you submit an application. So the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor or create and promote the arts in their communities. Here's our region down in the corner, these 18 counties that we cover. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota. Most of our funding comes from the state of Minnesota, some through the State General Fund, but mostly through the Legacy or Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We also receive money from the McKnight Foundation that goes to our grants for individual artists. The Equipment and Facilities Improvement Program is funded through the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. Some things that we are committed to: supporting artists and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high-quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high-quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high-quality, age-appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region. So these are things to keep in mind as you're thinking about your projects. All funded projects need to support these commitments. So we're hoping that your equipment purchase or facilities improvement will ultimately support one of these as well. The Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grant Program is open to arts organizations in the SMOC region to purchase equipment items and do facilities improvements, and those should strengthen the arts organization's ability to do their work and serve the arts needs of the region. We define arts organizations as organizations whose mission is focused primarily on the arts. We will accept requests for equipment from non-arts organizations, but they really need to make a case that the main purpose of that equipment or improvement is to support community arts projects. Here are some examples of equipment and facilities requests that we have funded in the past. Sound and lighting equipment, theater curtains, dance floors, risers, different kinds of structural improvements like bathrooms, elevators, anything related to improving your accessibility, different kinds of storage, music instruments, kilns or other studio equipment for arts classes, and then things as basic as computers, tablets, printers, chairs and tables, office furniture. So those are all the kinds of things we are thinking of funding through this program. If your organization does not own the space that it uses, you will have to come up with a facility cooperative agreement between your organization and whoever owns that space. the agreement should spell out how your organization will be able to access the things that they have purchased. Things like who will be allowed to use this equipment that you've bought, what happens if your organization moves to a different location, just outlining all of that kind of information. And you'll need to include this agreement in your grant application. The Equipment and Facilities Improvement Grants are available for up to $10,000 or 80% of the project's cost, whichever is less. And you, as the applicant, would need to provide at least 20% match toward the project. So as an example, if your project was going to cost exactly $10,000, you could request a grant for $8,000 and you would need to come up with the additional $2,000 on your own. If you're an organization that receives operating support from us, you cannot include prorated operating type costs in the budget for this grant, since we're assuming that's all covered under your operating support. And then we do have a limit to how much you can request over a period of time. You can only receive up to $50,000 for equipment and facilities within a 10-year time frame. Here are some eligibility things to be aware of. The following here are not eligible for SMOC grants: new construction or purchase of real estate, activities of a for-profit project or business, projects that don't have an art focus, educational projects within a school system, any activities taking place outside of Minnesota, activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience, fundraising events. In other words, the grant funding that you get should allow your project to break even, not to make a profit for your organization. Also ineligible are payments of debts incurred before the grant begins, using these grant funds to match another SMOC grant, or if you have a past due final report. So this is just an overview of some of the eligibility items. Make sure to check both the guidelines for this specific program and our general grant guidelines that apply to all of our grant programs to make sure you are aware of all of those eligibility items. And we'll look later where these guidelines documents are available to you. You'll need to have a start date and an end date for your project. Your start date should be the point that you're really getting your project going. Once you start ordering supplies or need to put a down payment down on a contract or doing any sort of advertising about the improvement that you're doing. So you can't spend any money before that project start date. If there's something that you would absolutely have to pay for before the start date, like a deposit on something, you could not include those funds in your grant budget. You'd need to pay for those totally separately on your own. No advertising about your project until the start date. It should not be the date of your first activity that's starting up related to this project, since you'll need that time to do preparation and order whatever you need. You also need to choose a project end date. It's good to give yourself a little extra time after you think everything will be purchased or installed, just so you can gather some feedback on that. We have 2 rounds for this year for this grant program. The first round has a deadline of September 11th for projects starting November 1st or later. And the second round applications are due February 12th for projects starting April 1st or later. It's really important to note that applications need to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline. The system will not allow you to submit after that time. For your application, you'll need to have a project director, and an authorizing official for your project. The project director is the person who's most directly responsible for everything going on with the project. Sometimes it's the grant writer, doesn't need to be. Then you'll also need the authorizing official, which would be the president or treasurer or some other person from your organization who has authorizing power. And the project director and the authorizing official cannot be the same person. Both of them will need to sign the application, contract, and final report. If your organization does not have their official 501c3 nonprofit status or is not a unit of city, county government, you'll need to find an organization that is one of those things to act as your fiscal sponsor. You'll need an agreement with that organization that spells out the relationship between the two of you, things about how bills are being paid, who's responsible for what. And then someone from that fiscal sponsor organization needs to sign your application, contract, and final report as well. The fiscal sponsor will receive the grant funds, and they are legally responsible for the management of the funds and the completion of the project. Any questions? I'll pause for a few minutes, and if you have anything you'd like to ask about, just type it into that chat window. I haven't seen any questions come through, but please feel free to just type something in there if you have a question that comes up. We will move on and take a look at what is available to you on our website. So there's a couple of spots on our website that you can access the online grant system. Here on the home page, there's this black grants box with the login button that will take you in there. And then on the pages for each of the individual grant programs, there's also a login button as well. So we will go to the page for the equipment and facilities improvement grants. And so this apply now button here will also take you to the online grant system. You don't have to be applying to push on that button there. If you're just wanting to get back into the system, it'll still take you to the login page. So on each of our pages for the grant programs, you'll find similar information. We've got the specific guidelines for this grant program, along with our general grant guidelines that apply to all of the grant programs. We have the application questions that are in a Word document for draft writing. Some people like to answer all of their questions in that Word document first and then later paste them into the online application. You don't have to do it that way, but if you'd like to, that's available for you. We have our budget form, which is also available within the application. The evaluation criteria that the grant reviewers will be using to score your application. So you have a little idea what they'll be looking for. And then we've also got a video tutorial for the online grant system and a applicant guide. The tutorial is just kind of a brief general overview, and then the guide has a lot more detail of what all the buttons do. Then we've got all the important dates for the different deadline rounds for the program. If you return here after a webinar, we'll post the recording if there's something that you wanted to go back and listen to again. So right now we will click our Apply Now button to go to the login page. And I'll just log in here. If you're logging in for the first time without having applied for anything before, you'll be taken directly to this apply screen that we're going to go to in a minute. But otherwise, logging in, you'll come back to your applicant dashboard. So for right now, we're going to go to the apply page. And this lists all of the grant programs that we have currently available. You'll just scroll through to find the one you want. Here's our equipment and facilities improvement. If you want to just preview the application without starting one, you can click preview there. Otherwise, you can click apply up in this corner to start your application. A couple things to point out here. If you need to work in another language, we do have Google Translate in the system, so that can change the interface and all of the application questions into your language for you. A new button that we have here this year is the Copy Previous Answers button. If you click that, it'll bring up a list of previous applications that you've done in all the different programs, and you can select one of those and it will take any answers to questions that are in your old application and this new one and copy them over. Another new button that we have this year is the Collaborate button. If you click on that, you can invite someone else to work on the application with you. They don't need to already have an account in the system. Once they receive this message that's sent to them, it will ask them to create a password, and later if they want, they can fill out a full account profile, but that's all that they really need to do to get started there. So you would just put their email address in here, set the permissions that you're giving them, and say something like, can you fill in the section on audience numbers? And then they'll be able to get into the application and work on that part with you. You'll need a name for your project, and that can be just very basic, describing what you're intending to do. Here's where you put in the amount that you're requesting, but you're probably going to want to wait to fill that in until you've completed your budget form. We have links again here to your guidelines for this program and that Word document with the application questions. We like to remind everybody that we do have a pretty large character limit for most of the fields. We have that there just in case there's something that you really just need to say a lot about to fully explain it, but in general, the reviewers appreciate short, concise answers, so please don't feel like you need to try and reach the character limit on the fields. And again, here we have the evaluation score sheet that the grant panelists will be using. So into the actual application, you'll describe what you're planning to do. We've got some upload fields here if you want to include some sort of diagram of how things are going to be hooked up, or photos of the space that you're going to be working in. The reviewers really appreciate being able to picture what the plan really is. So those are optional, but a good thing to have. Here's where you'll put in your project start and end dates. You'll talk about the kind of planning that you're doing and what schedule your project will be on. You'll need to list both who's involved from your organization in this project, as well as any contracted people who are helping you with that. You'll need to say how you chose that particular company or contractor and for what reason. Here's where you can put in the form, the cooperative agreement that you have if you do not own your own facility that you have with the owner. Then we have our budget section, and we've got some samples here if you're kind of looking at how you would fill one out. They're helpful for figuring out how much match you need to have, but we will take a look at the actual blank form here that you'll be filling out. So you will open this form and save it to your computer. So you can put either your project or organization name there. And here you'll just list all of the costs involved with your project. It's good to be pretty specific when you're itemizing those things. And if you run out of room here, there is a budget and narrative section back in the application. So you'll put in all of your expenses here, and this total cash cost line will total those expenses up for you. Then here's the section for your cash match for the project. So if you have some donations coming in, you can list those here, and then in this box here, whether they are A, anticipated, or R, received. And then you can include here if there is any of your organization's cash that you are also earmarking for this project. So this double check line will calculate 20% of your expenses from up here as your minimum cash match. So you'll want to make sure that you have at least that much. So this is where you may need to fill in with your organization cash. Then down here, it'll calculate in this box the 80% of your total cash cost from above, and reminds you that your request cannot exceed either that amount or $10,000, whichever is less. And there's another handy double check field down here that will take your cost minus your match, and you should end up with the amount that you are requesting. So once you've completed that, you can upload your file. It'll bring up the window to choose wherever you've got that file saved. If you have any purchases of equipment or labor bids that are more than $500, you'll need to provide bids for each of those items. But if you are getting, say, 4 of the same thing, and that ends up to totaling $500, you don't need to do bids for that, just for an actual one item that is greater than $500. And you don't necessarily have to have chosen the cheaper of your 2 bids, but it's good to talk about in the narrative why you chose the one that you did. This next section is all about your organization, a brief history, some information about the programs you offer and the people you serve. Then this next question asks for some more detail about the arts programming that you do, how you make your artistic choices, because we're really looking to see that you are putting on high artistic quality activities. Some information about how the community supports your organization, your board members. Then this next section is about how your organization serves the underserved populations in your community. So in this first question, we'd like you to list in your community all of those groups that may be underserved or underrepresented. It gives you some examples here. You might define that by race or ethnicity, socioeconomic level, age, ability, etc. So here we really want you to just take a good look at your community and come up with any of those groups that might be underserved or underrepresented. Then in this next question, we want you to touch on at least one of those groups that you mentioned above and say what you do specifically to help them be able to participate in your projects in general. And there are some examples here. Then some information about your ADA accessibility, also talking about all of your organization's activities in general, how do you ensure that your activities are accessible? This next question about grant history is about other grants not from SMOC that you have received. We ask for some annual financial information. You'll be looking at your most recently completed fiscal year, and we want a beginning balance that you're starting at, which would include any funds that you have in checking accounts, savings accounts, etc. Then you'll enter in your income for that year, your expenses, and then you'll be left with your ending balance of what you have left for assets at the end of the year. And if there's anything that you'd like to explain about those numbers, we've got a narrative box there. This next section is all about the impact that this project will have on your organization. How is it furthering your mission? What specific programs that you have will benefit from this project? And then just some audience numbers. So if you wanted to look ahead to how much audience do you think will be benefiting from this equipment or improvements in the next year or at the next performance, something like that. So not necessarily just who's participating in the actual purchasing or installing of whatever you are getting through the grant. We are doing our outcome evaluation plan or goals and measurement a little differently this year, and this is something that we're doing statewide. The state of Minnesota and its regional arts councils have these Minnesota Arts goals that we're all working towards. And through your grant projects, these outcomes will support those goals. So what you'll need to do is choose at least one of these Minnesota Arts outcomes that you think your project will meet. We suggest for this grant program that you choose either 3 or 7 as your main goal or outcome. And then for each outcome that you chose, you'll need to say what skill, knowledge, attitude, behavior will change as a result of the project that you're doing and who will be affected by that change. And then down in the second question, what is your plan to measure or prove that those outcomes have actually happened? So we've got an example here that says here's what this group is doing for their project. They chose outcome number 3, and then they've got a few changes that they anticipate will take place for these groups of people. And then finally, their measurement or evaluation. The equipment and facilities improvement grants are kind of difficult to kind of look beyond far enough to come up with some of these goals, but I think the example here will help. So we're not really looking for, I wanted a copier, we bought a copier, and now we have it is our outcome. We're looking for what is this printer or copier going to enable you to do. So it helps if you set your end date out a little further. That will allow you to use whatever this equipment or improvement is for a period of time if you want to wait until you've done one production or one exhibit and kind of be able to get feedback during that time. There's also a spot here for you to upload if you have a written survey that you're using as part of that. Maybe you want to have whoever is normally using the lighting equipment, for instance, rate before and after what how their experience is using this lighting equipment, and you could share the questions you'd like them to answer about that. This next section on data collection does not have any bearing on your application. It's just some information that we need to gather. For each of these, you will just click on the link to bring up the possible codes that you could enter, choose the one you want, and type that in the field. Then we just need some contact information from you. You'll put in that information for your project director, for your authorizing official. Then it asks you if you'll be using a fiscal sponsor. If you will, this section will show up for you to fill out the contact information for the fiscal sponsor as well as your agreement with them. You'll need to provide either your 501c3 nonprofit status determination letter, or if you are using a fiscal sponsor, their 501c3 status letter. Then we just ask to know who is the grant writer in case we have some questions, so you can just mark if it's one of these people, or if not, it gives you a space to put in your information. Then finally, for our signatures, you'll check this box to certify your application that everything you've put in here is correct. And then now with our new collaborate button that's back at the top, you can invite a colleague to sign this form directly, so they would be able to log in and type their name into the appropriate signature box. Down at the bottom here, we've got a few important buttons. Abandon request. If you've found you've started in the wrong grant program, or you started an extra one when you had already started one, you can just click this abandon button and that will take that out of your active requests that you're working on. You can save your application here. It does save, do an auto save regularly, but it's good to just also click that save button too, just to be sure. And then here's the submit button for when you are all ready to submit. And note that once you submit your application, you will not be able to come back in and edit anything. So for now, we're going to save our application. And when you do that, it will list here are all the questions you have not yet answered. So it won't let you submit if there's a required question that you have not answered. So you would just click this continue button to keep working. Otherwise, we're going to go back to the dashboard. So here's now this grant application that we just started under our active requests. And if you want to get back in to edit that, it's got this edit application link for you here. If you receive a grant, you can come right back to the same spot and it'll have your contract and final report there listed as links under here. I'll stop again for just a minute in case there's any questions that you want to type in that chat window. We'll move on and talk about a few tips to keep in mind when you're working on your application. It's really good to start early just to make sure you have time to gather everything you need, especially with this program. You'll need to be getting bids most likely from a couple different places, so give yourself plenty of time for that, or time to get any questions that you might have answered. It's good to read the guidelines carefully, both the ones for this program and the general guidelines. Also make sure to read your questions fully. A lot of them have more than one part to the question, so make sure that you are covering all of those in your answer. As we talked about before, keep those answers clear and concise, although as above, you should make sure you still answer all the parts of the question, but our reviewers are often reading quite a few grant applications at once, so they do appreciate conciseness. It's also really good to assume that those reviewers don't know anything about your organization or the programs that you do. The reviewers are only allowed to base their scoring on things that you have put in the application. So even if they know something about your organization or have participated in their programs before, they can't use that information to determine the score that they're going to give you. So make sure that everything important really is in the application. Also good to have someone proofread your application. And other things to watch out for that are some kind of common mistakes is not having the right start date. Make sure that it is not earlier than the earliest allowed start date for the round. Make sure that it gives you enough time to do what you need to do before you are starting your activities. Also, make sure that everything in your budget adds up and you've got that correct amount of cash match. It's really important to refer to those double check fields. It's a good idea to call us to talk about your project before starting an application. If you have questions about, is this even eligible? Is this the right program? Do you have any suggestions? We are there to answer those questions. Also, any questions that you may have as you're filling out the application. We can review your application before the deadline if you let us know, I think I have most of this together. Can you take a look at it? We can read through and let you know if there's something that you're missing or a question that you didn't quite answer how we were hoping. So if you can let us know up to about 2 weeks before the deadline, we can guarantee that we're able to look through that for you. After that point, we can't guarantee that, but we may be able to look at it. So once you submit your application, the first thing that happens is SMOC staff will review it for eligibility and make sure that everything is there. If there's something missing that would affect your eligibility, we will contact you and give you 48 hours to remedy that. Once all of that has happened, your application goes on to a panel of individuals from around the region who will discuss and score your application and the others from that round based on the criteria for that program, which we'll take a look at in a minute. Then finally, the SMOC board will take the recommendations from the grant review panel and make their final funding decisions. The scoring criteria for equipment and facilities improvement grants are as follows. Most important is the merit of the organization and the artistic quality of its programs for 18 points. The impact the project will have on your organization for 11 points. The feasibility of the project, is this a reasonable budget? Will the things that they chose to purchase really meet their needs, for 5 points? And then finally, the outcome evaluation plan for 3 points. And you'll need to pass on each of these criteria and overall in order to be considered for funding. If your grant is awarded, you'll have to do an online contract within 30 days. Then once that's completed, you'll receive 80% of your grant award before your start date. Then you'll receive the remaining 20% after your project and your final report have been completed. You'll need to acknowledge SMOC's financial assistance. This is a little weird with equipment items, but sometimes groups will put a little sticker on, each microphone or something saying this was funded through SMOC and the legacy funds. But we will send you everything that you need as far as the actual credit lines and logos, so you won't have to guess about what needs to go where. Finally, you'll need to do an online final report within 60 days of your project end date. So after that project end date, you've got 60 days in which to complete your report. And it's a good idea to look through that final report when you're just getting started with your project. It'll be posted on your dashboard there where we were looking as soon as your contract is completed. So just to look through so you know for sure which information you will need to gather during the project. We are in our office Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. You can stop by and visit us, give us a call, email us with any questions that you might have. We are here as your advocates. Mock staff does not have any say in what gets funded or what doesn't get funded. We are just working with you to help you have the best application that you have. So please don't hesitate to contact us.